Good evening, everyone. In the name of the Freiburg Institute for Advanced Studies and the Tsvetaeva Center at the University of Freiburg, I would like to welcome you to tonight's special lecture titled The State of Mind, Transformations of Public Opinion in Russia 2018 until 2023. I would like to especially welcome our guest, Professor Ekaterina Schulmann, who I will introduce to you in a minute. First, though, I would like to begin by posing two questions. First, what do we here in Germany, as Germans, really know about what is happening in Russia at the moment? And my second question, what do we here in Germany, as Germans, really know about the Russian society in our day and age? Their thoughts, their aspirations, their feelings, their mood. What do we know about patterns of voting? I am positing, and I'm saying this as a political scientist, I am positing our German perspectives are based on just small bits of, more often than not, incomplete information. I am positing that the information that the vast majority of us receive from German media, say print media, television, internet, social media, they have a focus that what is happening at the state level or at the political level in Russia, what the President Putin says and what his ministers are saying. Obviously, the vast majority of German correspondents and journalists, they do have a good knowledge, there's no question about it, but all in all, it is increasingly difficult for German correspondents and for us as the public to get information on Russia, to be able to report on Russia from the journalist side. Russia is becoming isolationist, even stronger than in the past. It is in isolation. So what is my point, ladies and gentlemen? My point is this. What is lacking most of the time is a genuine inside information. What is lacking is a truly Russian perspective, a Russian analysis. Essentially, I am talking about the perspective of an expert and insider. So tonight, the Freiburg Institute of Advanced Studies and the Tsvetaeva Center at the University of Freiburg have the unique privilege of hosting Russian professor Ekaterina Schulmann, who will, as the title goes, examine the development of public opinion in Russia in the past 5 years. So allow me to introduce our speaker, and I'm truly very happy that you are here tonight. Professor Schulmann is a political scientist who specializes in the legislative process in modern Russia. She specializes on parliamentarism and decision-making mechanisms in hybrid political regimes. She has a PhD in political science, and she has served as an associate professor at the Moscow School of Social and Economic Sciences. Next, she was a senior lecturer at the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration, the RANEPA, and she was a member of the Presidential Council for Civil Society and Human Rights. She has published widely, and I just want to mention one book. She's the co-author of the book The New Autocracy, Information, Politics, and Policy in Putin's Russia, which was published by Brookings Institution Press in 2018. And she contributes to a vast array of different journals and magazines, for example, Vedomosti newspaper, the New Times magazine. There is online media such as Republic RU, Kolta RU, or Carnegie RU. Also, and many of you might be aware of this, she has hosted a program, a weekly program on Echo Moscow radio station, which was dedicated to popularizing political science terminology and concepts. And of course, I have to mention, she has a personal YouTube channel, which has an impressively large subscriber audience, and I'm really jealous and envious when I see the numbers which we as the University of Freiburg cannot match, unfortunately. Now, she's a member of the editorial board of the UNESCO Courier magazine, and she was a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin for 1 year. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I prepared for tonight's lecture, I discovered a statement, and I would like to read this to you, a statement from Professor Schulmann. I want to read those 3 lines because I think it's a perfect transition for what we are about to hear. She said, "Muses tend to be silent when cannons are heard. But intellectual duty calls upon the scholar to act at least as a witness, and whenever possible, as an analyst of this dramatic moment in our shared history." So, a muse, a scholar, a witness, and an analyst. I wonder, is there a better person, a better expert, to share insights into the state of mind of the Russian population and the ongoing transformations? And of course, for me, the answer is no, she's the one. And we are very happy to have you here tonight. We are very happy that you accepted the invitation to come from the global Berlin to the not so global and small Freiburg, but academically we are very strong, no question about it. So we are happy that you are here tonight, and we are truly looking forward to your lecture, and the floor is yours, madam.
Thank you very much for this, I would say, slightly intimidating introduction, and for the opportunity to speak in this highly respectable institution. It's an honor. And I hope I am addressing, at least as part of the audience, students and people who are interested in what is happening in Russia and who are interested in political science and in social sciences in general. This introduction was, as I said, flattering to the point of intimidation, but I will add a few words about my scholarly specialty so that you will understand why and how am I qualified to speak on the things that I'm going to speak about. I am indeed a political scientist, but the topic that I'll be addressing tonight properly belongs to sociology. I'm not conducting any research of my own. I'm not conducting my own surveys. I'm using other people's data. Whenever I'll be addressing this data, I'll try to place it properly to the institution it belongs to. What I do is collect this data from various sources, combine it, and try to analyze it in, again, attempting to form a more or less coherent picture of this very complex entity, which is Russian society. Before we start with our attempt at description, I have also my own two questions to ask and to at least attempt to answer. And these are the questions which are asked very often whenever we are speaking of public opinion in a country like Russia. First, question number one, how far can we trust polling data? How true it is? How far does it reflect real opinions of the people? And the second question, which is connected to the first, how far and why it matters. If we are dealing with a non-free society, if we are dealing with an autocracy, and Russia is not a democracy, let me tell you that as an expert, also as a citizen, why does it even matter what people think if they do not have political subjectivity, if they do not act as political actors, if their opinion does not matter to the authorities of the country? Why should it matter to a researcher or an observer? Both very relevant questions. Both do not have simple answers, but I will try to address them one by one. So, about how far can we trust the polls? Authoritarian political regimes, especially modern autocracies, which are sometimes called informational autocracies, or competitive, or electoral ones, run on propaganda as much or even more than on violence. One of the main things they do is produce impressions. They incessantly try to control the public sphere, including sociological services. They try to subvert, in fact, any public or political or civil institution, but they are especially eager to control the polling data. Because in the absence of free elections, regular publications of various types of ratings serve as a kind of substitute for election results. If you cannot afford being an autocrat, you cannot afford the risks of electoral transition, electoral rotation, you have still to show that you are not just a despot ruling by force, but that you rule by consent of the people, that what you do is in fact a reflection of what people want. How do you do this? One of the ways is the publication of ratings. So what you do in this situation is you control some sociological services, polling services, and you shut up the others. That's the self-evident line of conduct. Another thing which does not require an expert to notice is the so-called spiral of silence. Spiral of silence is, again, a very popular term in the public sphere, but it is not always correctly understood. Often, when we speak about spiral of silence, we mean that people have one opinion, but they're afraid to express it. That's why they say the opposite thing publicly. But that's not exactly how it works. Spiral of silence looks like this. Actually, an average person does not often have pronounced political opinions, especially in the absence of public discussion on political subjects. So whenever he or she is asked the question, the natural impulse is to think, what is my opinion? My opinion is like everybody's opinion because it must be a correct one. And what is everybody's opinion? And then you try to remember the last thing you heard on the subject. And that most often is something you heard on TV evening news during the 15 minutes you've been hearing them while you were cooking supper in your kitchen. That's the most widespread type of informational consumption. And what you've been hearing is, of course, the state propaganda. So what you do is you join the imaginary majority that you've just been forming in your head. And with your addition, it becomes one person larger. And that's why it's called the spiral. That's why it's getting broader and broader. That's how those imaginary majorities are formed. And that's one of the things autocracies do. So it's, again, quite evident that those tendencies that I have described are accelerated in the times of political crises and virtual war censorship. If you know that expressing the wrong opinion, giving a wrong answer, can land you for 15 years in a penal colony, it tends to consolidate public opinion in a wonderful way. What we have here, this, again, pretty hard to read table, but I will try to explain. That's the figures for response rates. Low response rates are a curse of polling industry worldwide. Russia is not unique in this respect at all. In the United States, 20% response rates is supposed to be normal. What does it mean? It means that out of every 10 people you address, 8 refuse to talk to you, and only 2 agree. That's 20% response rate. So what we have here is the response rates from 5 to 8. These are the figures for 2022, February to July. That's just an example. So the rate of refusals is around 95. So whenever you hear next time that much percent of Russians think this and that, please remember that it's the percentage of Russians who have agreed to talk to a pollster. Sometimes people refuse in the beginning. They just do not respond. Sometimes they start answering the initial questions which seem to them innocent, but then they terminate their answer at the moment when questions become political. So that's the nice environment we are in. I do not think, with my experience of Russia watching for the last 20 years, I do not think that polling services, even the so-called pro-Kremlin ones, the ones which are directly controlled by the government, I do not think they fabricate results. They do what is called formative questions. Formative question is the one that has its own answer. You can all think of an example of a formative question. They ask questions like, do you support the special military operation, or are you a traitor to the motherland? Nice and easy, that one. So VCIOM is famous for this. But even VCIOM is a big factory. A lot of people work there. They do real work as well. So what is my point? My point is we cannot, in our situation, afford to ignore any sort of information. And we cannot afford to base our conclusions on any single sort of information. So you cannot say, I do not read VCIOM's data because they are pro-Kremlin, or I only read Levada because they are foreign agents, or I do not read Levada because they are foreign agents. What we have to do is we have to combine very different markers in order at least to try to form a more or less coherent picture. So the answer to the first question, how far are the polling data to be trusted? The answer is both yes it can and no it cannot. What I mean by combining markers, combining various data, we will see further when I show you the rest of my slides that we try to watch the dynamics of political opinions, or more correctly, answers to political questions, and to non-political ones, which people answer more easily. Sometimes those answers contradict each other, and that is where you should look. Another thing which is well known to anyone who studies, again, I do hope there are no real sociologists here because I'm repeating your class 101 thanks to you. But still, I need to say this in order to be understood. So no single figure is of importance by itself, only in comparison with others. Not the static, but the dynamics. Not the level, but the trend. Journalists most often ask you questions like, these are the latest results, please comment on them. But again, no figure means anything as it stands alone. What matters is what is called by pollsters the long lines. And that is why big polling services are so important, because they have archives, because they've been asking the same question for 20 years, and so you may watch the dynamics. We'll try to do that in a moment. So, question number 2, why public opinion matters in a non-democracy? You will, of course, remember that the very industry of polling was born in the United States in the end of the 19th century in an attempt to predict two things. First, how people will vote during presidential and congressional elections, and second, how consumers will behave, what they will do with their money. In both cases, people had a choice. They had a vote and they had a dollar, which they could invest this way or that. That's why their opinion mattered, because it had some sort of relations to their behavior. But if we are dealing with a citizen without citizens' rights, then why does their opinion matter if it is not, again, converted into any sort of political behavior, either protest or support or any other sort of political activity? The answer to this question lies in the nature of a modern autocracy. No political regime rules only by force, if it's of any length, of any duration at all. Every power needs legitimate base. It needs some sort of public agreement or at least public non-resistance. And that's exactly what autocracies are aiming at. As opposed to both democracies and totalitarian systems, autocracies stand on non-involvement, on non-participation, on political passivity, on the depoliticization of the people. What they need from the people is, again, non-involvement in political affairs. This goal is achieved in various ways. It is not exactly our subject to discuss that. But this non-resistance, this passive agreement is still needed. And if you do not have the fortune to enjoy the real feedback, which is natural and free electoral process, you still need to know what your populace may be up to. That's why, by the way, this cult of the rating, as I said, is a kind of substitute or surrogate for elections. Autocracies are very anxious about their people. We know that in addition to the publicly available sociological results, the Kremlin is holding the so-called secret polls. I can tell you a story or two about it, but it's slightly ridiculous. It is supposed that almost every decision before it is made public is tested on focus groups and this kind of polls. FSO conducts them, the Federal Security Service, not the FSB. But FSO is literally the Federal Service of Bodyguards. And in order to explain why is it doing sociological work, I need to go back to various stages of Russian administrative reform, and I'm not going to do that. I may do this later as an answer to the question. Just trust me. I'm an expert. So, public opinion matters, not in the way it matters in democracies, not because these people have the right to vote, but because the power needs to make sure that steps they take will not be met by any adverse or unexpected reaction. So, what we have on this slide, I was telling you about the long lines, and this is the long line, one of the examples. This is the presidential approval rating for President Putin, also for Prime Minister Putin during the short stretch of time when he was Prime Minister. So black line is approval, blue line is non-approval. A little preface to the question of presidential ratings. This is the holy of holies. This is the figure you most often hear mentioned. But what actually is the presidential rating? They come in three forms. There's the electoral rating. Answer to the question, will you vote for this person if elections were next Sunday? We do not have those. Russian sociological services stopped doing this sort of questioning after the last presidential elections in 2018 for various reasons. So we do not know the electoral rating. Then there's the approval rating, approval of activity, as it is called. Do you approve of what the president is doing as a president? These are always the highest. That's why they are cited most often, because it's a kind of approval of reality, agreement with reality level. People hear this question like this. You know there's a president? Yes, you agree? Yes, I do. So what's the use of contradicting? That's the approval of activity, what the president does. And then there's a trust rating. And trust rating, in its turn, comes in two forms, in an open question and in a closed question. Trust rating is whom do you trust? And if it is asked as a closed question, then you are presented with a list. Whom among these people do you trust? If it's an open question, you are asked whom among political and public figures do you trust? And you have to come up with a name. Trust ratings are much lower. We'll come to them. And they're still lower when asked in an open form. Because if you have the list, you choose the name you know. And this guy has been around for quite some time. So his name is pretty well recognized. And therefore, you point to him. But if you have to come up with a name from the top of your head, then it gets more difficult. So, what I want to point your attention to in this rating, in this line rather, is this curious kind of dynamic. You see, this rating is pretty unstable. And it follows this succession. There's a decline. Look, for example, 2003, 2005. There's a periodical decline, which is then followed by a period of protests. The protests are quelled. There's no problem with that. A period of repression follows. But repressions and the defeat of protests do not bring back the popularity. And then comes some sort of foreign policy adventure. And popularity goes up again. Look at this sequence. 2005, 2008, Georgia. You may say it was a different president, but he was the prime minister, he was very much around, so it's basically the same thing. 2011, 2012, popularity at the lowest, nationwide protests, nationwide repressions, and then Crimea, ratings go up. Then they start going down again, and that's where our story starts, 2018, presidential elections. They went well enough for the system. Nice, quiet election campaign, no protests, no competition, everything just fine. But immediately following the elections in March, the presidential rating, approval rating, started to decline. You will usually hear that the reason was the pension age reform, the raising of the pension age, but it actually started before. Pension age reform, which was very badly received by Russians, accelerated the process which has already begun. Why has it begun? Why is it beginning time and again? Maybe it's fatigue, most probably.Maybe for some other reason. It usually happens that there's some sort of hangover immediately following elections. It's like the 1st of January. You have celebrated New Year, and then you wake up, and the world is the same, and you are the same. Nothing very much new has happened, no transformation, so you are disappointed. It's the same with elections. You have voted for the guy, he won, you celebrate, and then life goes on much as before. But in our case, it was much more pronounced and much more dramatic. And this decline went on and on and on, also through the 2 COVID years. Unlike in many other countries that have experienced the pandemic, Russia has not seen the rallying round the flag effect. In fact, during 2020 and 2021, many political and public institutions experienced the rise in trust. We will come to institutional trust a bit later. Everyone, NGOs, especially NGOs, very much so, regional authorities, local authorities, the government, the State Duma, for whatever reason, Russian business, Russian banks, almost every entity during pandemic, maybe due to this reason of common misfortune, common enemy, which was at that time COVID. So everyone, except the president, his trust and approval ratings continued to decline. We had a repression campaign in 2021, protest repression. Repression is always successful. Again, no problem with that, but it doesn't bring you back the love of the people. That's the catch. So what do? You go out and have your next foreign policy adventure. A little big this time. One of the books that are on the short list of Pushkin House Prize, of which I'm a jury going to London in June, is called Overreach, The History of Russia's Aggression in Ukraine. And that's a very good term. But we're not talking specifically about that. So you see, there's a kind of cycle here, which I think is very much perceptible in this picture. So in this table, you have the figures. I tried to show the latest ones. So approval is over 80%, disapproval about 15%, everything as desired. And now about the gap between trust and approval. I'm sorry for the color palette. It's not very pronounced, but again, I will try to explain. So the line on top, the light gray one, is approval of activity. The dark gray one is trust open question. So you see the gap, and you see in 2014, those lines were very close together. And then the gap started to widen. And then it went wider and wider. And look at the difference in 2022, 2023. So the answer seems to be, I totally approve of what the guy is doing, but I do not trust him at all. Non-free societies, very complicated. Nothing is linear. So you will see those red, whatever, things. They're getting higher and higher, showing the gap. Now we're coming to institutional trust, as I promised. Trust for institutions is generally pretty low in Russian society, as well as interpersonal trust. We are a low trust society in general, an atomized society filled with people who do not trust each other either personally or institutionally. The usual answer to the question, whom can one trust, is only family and closest friends. But given the rates of divorce and the skyrocketing amount of alimony debts in Russia, we are not very good at family virtues either. So we are an atomized society. In this respect, we can be very well compared to the Chinese. Also a society which has a reputation for being so traditional. But in reality, it's a very individualistic one, bent on individual success and consumption. That's what totalitarian regimes do to their citizens. That's the kind of people they educate. So, institutional trust, generally low. If we had here institutions like police or healthcare or education or parliaments, rates would be low. On the top of our institutional trust rating is the so-called conservative triad. President, church, army. Sounds like Frankist Spain, right? But here we have blue line, army, red line, Russian Orthodox Church, and violet line, media. You see, everyone is going down. Army was the most popular one. And it's a curious fact, because according to a tradition that has begun after the Second World War, in Soviet Russia and in post-Soviet Russia, army is not a political actor. Secret services and law enforcement are political actors, but army and navy are not. Great efforts are made by political leadership to create and preserve this state of affairs. It's curious to see how in this current situation, where it would be so natural for army to assume prominence in public affairs, again, political leadership is doing everything to ensure it is not happening. But people were sure that whatever our failures in every other respect, at least we have a great army. That was the popular trust. You see that it's going down too. And the Russian Orthodox Church is not doing very, very well either. It's not a pretty picture to look at. It generally shows a society which does not much trust anyone. Our highest moment of public optimism was, again, sadly, in 2014. Crimean euphoria was very much a real thing. Sometimes it's called Crimean Consensus. It showed signs of what I would call sociological harmony. Because when we will be looking at other markers further, we will see that now there's a lot of contradictions between various markers. Like, I approve of the president, but I do not trust him. I think the country is going in the right direction, but I'm extremely pessimistic about my economic outlook. I think the economy is going to do great, but I'm cutting on expenses. It happens every time. A less tolerant person would call it a schizophrenic picture, but we are not dealing in terms like this. But it does show a society in some sort of crisis. As the Russian saying has it, oh, and what happened? Ой, а что случилось? However, in 2014, there was a harmony in this kind of markers. People were optimistic about everything. And again, heartbreakingly, they were showing higher levels of, when answering to questions like, do you think you have an impact of what is happening in Russia? And they said yes. So they had this kind of illusion that something very good has happened, and they have a hand in it. And now some sort of new times are going to happen. Crimean euphoria lasted for approximately 3 years. 2014, 15, and 16. In 2017, it started to erode. Again, for various reasons. The signs of this erosion were the protests, the so-called youth protests organized by Navalny and his team, and a whole lot of regional and local protests, like protests against renovation campaign in Moscow, the so-called anti-garbage protests in Yaroslavl and up north, the Shias campaign, which lasted for almost 2 years, and by the way, which ended with a success. The protesters won. Sometimes it happens. So, Crimean Consensus was, as I said, real, but short-lived. There's no such thing as a consensus now. I will, again, try to show it. So, attitudes towards what is called in Russia the special military operation. We'll be using this terminology because that's what people hear when they get asked those questions. So we have to follow the same terminological line. This is, I think it's, It's a non-public, and it's a non-public survey. I'm always sorry to be using data like this. I much prefer open sources to the so-called insider information. But I must say that open polls done by FOM, Fond Общественное мнение, Public Opinion Fund, done by Levada or done by FCIOM, corroborate this. There are also two independent polling entities to which I would like to point your attention. One is called the Chronicles, Хроники, headed by Alexei Minyailo, who miraculously manages to stay in Russia till this moment. And the second is called Russkое поле, Russian field. We'll see, by the way, those, going back a little, those response rates, that's from them. Because not every sociological service publishes response rates. It doesn't look good, but they do, and we are grateful. So, the question is, should or should not Russia have started a military operation in Ukraine? Answers from, this is the end of April 2022 till the end of November 2022. And the respondents are aged 18 to 45, which is important. We'll come to this later. Age is very important parameter in defining Russia's attitudes towards the war. So, red, we should, green, we should not, and yellow, we do not know. Look at the very end of this graph. Look at the yellow line going sharply up and red line going sharply down. We have reasons to suppose that people choose I do not know as a safer option. If they are supportive, why should not they say so? But if they are not supportive, they have an option of not answering, which they most often do, or they can choose this more neutral answer. And this is the same question, the same time span for 45 plus. And again, here we come to a single most important parameter defining and determining the attitudes of Russians towards the war, towards governmental policies in general, towards the president personally, towards every topic under the sun you can think of, and that is age. Nothing else is of such importance. Neither region, nor economic status, nor social status, nothing but age. And in this age question, there are approximately three groups, three demographic strata, which are currently active on the Russian social scene. And these are what we could call the grandparents, people aged 60 plus, 65 plus, the Soviet baby boomers, people born in the 50s. It's a pretty numerous generation. By the way, it's the fact of their retiring and being succeeded by a much smaller strata, which necessitated the before-mentioned pension age reform. So these are a lot of people. Coincidentally, these are the people who occupy the top tier of Russian administrative, economic, financial, military hierarchy. Whatever you take, media, corporations, culture, or politics, the top will be occupied by people aged 60, 65 plus. And they are supportive of everything. They just love whatever is happening. They are also the most optimistic, economically and otherwise. They feel most pride for their country. So they're the best possible citizens you can think of. Any government would be happy with this kind of citizenship, except for the fact that they're dying out. But that will take some time. So these are the grandparents. The second group are what we would call children, people aged 40 plus, and the grandchildren, people aged 20 plus. The one thing we should know about Russian young people is that there are rather few of them. If I had a picture of Russian demographic pyramid here, you will see what I mean. Maybe I should have shown it to you. It doesn't look much like a pyramid. It looks like a Christmas tree which has seen better days. It has a gap every 25 years due to the colossal demographic losses of the 20th century. Some wounds do not heal. They just come back and then they come back. There's a small generation which gives birth to another small generation. So now we have people born in the 90s, when the birth rates were low, both for reasons that I have mentioned and for reasons of hostile economic environment. We had, during the golden Putin years, almost exactly 10 years of relatively high birth rates, 2004, 2014, or 2006, 2016. Mother's capital had to do with it, but economic growth had most to do with it. So we had more children born during this period than usually. After 2014, birth rate started to decline. Again, oh, what has happened? So, between those three groups, the chief difference lies between 60 plus and all the rest. Differences between 40 and 20 are, if not negligible, at least not so pronounced as the differences between this baby boomer generation and every other generation after them. They are a very specific set of people. Again, we will not be dealing with it in any great detail, but I think it's rather important. No generation before them was quite like them. No generation after them is quite like them. The superhuman efforts taken by the current Russian leadership to put ideology in school education, to control culture, to control theaters, to control literature, is maybe explained by the feeling that they will be succeeded by people who do not feel like them, who do not have the same worldview, who do not have the same mindset. And if they do not do something quick, then future will just slip from their fingers. I still consider the very beginning of special military operation to be caused by these reasons, rather than the desire to bring back Soviet Union or anything what they called geopolitics. Again, remember the cycle. Your popularity goes down, you try to repress your people, it doesn't bring your popularity back, and then you go and have a crusade. So, here we have graphs showing correlation between age and support of war. Blue line is the number of those in favor of peace talks. Red line, continuation of special military operation. So the question was, should Russia continue military activities, or should it go and have an attempt to communicate? So you will see the differences between ages. And you will also see that after 45, opinions began to look more or less the same. So it's not like, what is my point? It's not like we have to put our hope in some wonderful generation of 20-somethings. We can put our hope in any generation, except this single one. All the rest look more like normal people. Here we have the same parameter, but in more detail, and this shows us the degree to which Russian society tries to delegate responsibility to the authorities. The question is, would you support Vladimir Putin signing a peace agreement, or would you support Vladimir Putin marching on Kyiv and you? This is Russian field, it's their results, and the poll was end of September, beginning of October last year, 2022. So the red lines are for results for July, and blue lines results for September, October. So the most popular answer is support for any decision, and it has grown, you see? From July to September, the percentage of those who say, I will support the president whatever he does, it's his cup of tea, let him deal with that, has grown. The number of those is the second set of figures. Those who want a new march on Kyiv, it has declined. Those next, those who want peace agreement, gone up. Fourth, unsure about a march on Kyiv, rather in favor of peace. 5, unsure about peace, rather in favor of march on Kyiv. We could, I think, add those two smaller groups to the larger groups, pro-war or pro-peace. So why this delegation? I have mentioned before that modern autocracies stand on depolitization. The message they send to their people is this: you do not meddle in our affairs, which is power and money. We do not meddle in yours. You live as you want to, we make your life pretty comfortable, you earn your bread in the way you think fit, but you leave big questions to the big boys. And the biggest of these big questions is, of course, foreign policy and military affairs. These are specifically the issues which, in the public mind, belong to political leadership, belong to the authorities. That's why it is such a popular answer. They have their reasons. They should know better. They know better. We do not know everything. Again, it's a very popular point of view, and it's a very natural one. Again, if I had here the figures for answers to questions like, do you think this or that country is hostile or friendly to Russia? And it's actually, these are very funny graphs, because the answers go like that. They're extremely unstable, and they follow very closely the fluctuations of TV news. For example, Turkey. Do you think Turkey is a friendly or a non-friendly country? When they shot down our plane, the rating of unfriendliness went up. Then people forgot about this plane, rating of friendliness went up. So whatever they hear on TV, they repeat to the pollsters. Again, that's not so, I think it's quite understandable. If you're not an expert, if you're not interested, and why should you be interested in issues which have no impact on your daily existence? So you delegate responsibility to the authorities. But here, we have a situation when what used to be a distant foreign policy issue, something you just watch on TV, source of free emotions, like a TV series, like a Game of Thrones. You watch, you root for your team, you don't pay anything. You don't even pay for subscription to Netflix because it's free. TV news is free. And again, it has no impact on your life whatsoever. But then something happened. And now there's a clash between this habit of delegating and the feeling that authorities have maybe mixed something up. And now it does have an impact on me. And this is a very, again, for us people who tend to follow political news or even study them for a living, it is not so evident. The degree of this, the depth of this conflict, the degree of the surprise, we can see, this is one of my favorite pictures. We can see the degree of surprise, as I said, on this very nice graph. This is by FOM, Public Opinion Fund. And it's a very good question. It's here at the bottom in italics. They ask this question: what mood prevails among your surrounding? And why is it such a good formula? Because if you ask a person, what is your mood? Are you anxious or are you calm? Of course you say, oh, I'm solid as a rock. Everyone else is running on ceiling, but I'm absolutely fine. But if you ask about other people, then you suddenly become much more realistic. So, look at this. Orange line is anxiety. Green, March green, is calmness. And the moment they cross 21st of September 2021, mobilization. I think now, with the time that has passed, we may safely affirm that for the people in general, 21st of September was what February 24th was for the educated classes. They very genuinely did not realize that anything out of the way was happening before they got a knock at the door. We may call it naive or infantile or whatever, but I don't think it's fair to accuse people of living their daily lives without paying attention, it's not like not paying attention, they were watching TV. They just did not think it's serious. They did not think it's real. And again, if you try to place yourself in these people's shoes, maybe you will manage to understand how it works. So look at the end. Look at the end of this graph. It's till the 9th of April this year, so it's very fresh, and we have even fresher information. I could have added that. I was curious to see how this new law on electronic conscription affected public opinion, whether anxiety went up. And the answer is no, not yet. We still, you see, with all the time that has passed since mobilization, and with all the gigantic efforts authorities and propaganda has been taken to make people sure that mobilization is over, it's not going to be repeated, you have nothing to worry about, we still have not come back to the pre-September levels of anxiety. So we are still pretty high up. But so far, this new conscription campaign has not negatively affected the public mood. But more, still a lot of people feel anxious. What I was also trying to describe is this kind of instability. Look at those figures, look at those lines. These are not natural. They look like a picture of somebody who is having a heart attack. Anxiety goes up, and then a kind of unnatural euphoria also settles in. We will see the same dynamic in answers to questions about consumer optimism and financial perspectives, which should actually be quite conservative estimates. You may remember this effect from watching a horror movie. Something very horrible springs at you, but then you are not killed, you feel such a degree of relief. You feel almost euphoric. I think this is what this picture shows. This is not a society in a healthy state at all. Their degree of anxiety is unnatural, their degree of calmness is also unnatural. The one thing we can affirm is that they are not stable. So, feelings. This is according to, if I remember correctly, this is according to Form 2. What are your prevalent feelings at the moment? Red line is satisfaction, joy, inspiration, pride for the country. And blue line is anger, shame, depression, anxiety, fear, horror, shock, all the nice things. So it's from March 22 to March 23. The society began this campaign in pretty good form. It was quite enthusiastic, at least according to the polls. But then, again, something happened, and the levels of pride suddenly went down. This is the same feelings, but in more detail. You will see that still the most popular answer is pride, pride for the country. And that's the socially approved answer. But it is also somehow in decline. From 51% in March last year to 43% in March 2023. The second most popular answer is anxiety, fear, horror. That's also somewhat self-contradictory. We have like two almost equal parts of society. One is proud of I don't know what, another is horrified of whatever. And they are living together in as members of one society. I was saying that age is the single most important parameter in this respect. The second is gender. Men are more supportive than women of whatever is happening, but again, this is very secondary to age. The third parameter is economic well-being. The richer people are more supportive of the war than the poorer ones. That is also, I think, very understandable. Generally, what we need to know about Russian society is that if we speak about middle class in strictly economic terms, in terms of consumption and salaries, then Russian middle class would very much consist of state servants. People in governmental employ, directly or indirectly. People who are working for administrations, various levels, federal, regional, local. People who are working for state corporations, state banks. They have rather high incomes. Their incomes are stable. They have various subsidies, additional payments, social guarantees, and their well-being belongs to the state. Depends on the state, so they have an interest in being loyal to the state. That's why those who are better off are more supportive of the war than those who are poorer. This is quite new, April 2023. Are you personally ready to give 1,000 to 2,000 rubles a month for the army and to pay for those who are in the front line? The dark blue is yes, definitely yes. Light blue is rather yes. Yellow is rather no. Red is definitely no. Gray is I'm not sure. Generally, you see, 20 plus 31, 51% of Russians don't want to support with their money all these nice things that they support with their other types of answers. But in Moscow, it's even worse. Bad people, those Moscovites. They don't want to part with their money at all. So, it's one thing to say I approve, it's another thing to say I will pay. And this is financial optimism. Form again. Do you think that material well-being of your family is going to get better or worse in the next 12 months? Green line, it will get better. Red line, it's going to get worse. And this is what I would call a kind of schizophrenic result. Consumer optimism in Russia is at historical records high. People are so optimistic they just don't know what to do with themselves. At the same time, we know from data that they're cutting on their spendings, they're spending less. They are economizing on things like food or clothes. So what they express is consumer optimism. It may be, again, a socially approved answer, or it may be some kind of delayed hope. Today is not so good, but next 12 months are sure to get better. Now to the last part, which is media consumption. You remember, again, before we proceed, please come back to those. Yeah, you remember that? 1842, source of information, internet. 42 plus, source of information, TV. This difference between age traders is also the difference between various types of media consumption. So what's happening to media consumption? Still, the single most important source of information overall is TV. We should not downplay its importance. That's the dark blue line. The yellow line is social media. Yellow line, social media, light blue line, internet, and red Telegram channels, very much on the rise. So, internet is still secondary to TV, but TV consumption is going down and internet consumption is going up. This is the coverage of main TV channels in Russia before, 2021, 2022. There was a big spike in TV consumption in the beginning of pandemic and in the beginning of the war. And it followed exactly the same trend, sharply up, there for like 3 months, and then down again. So TV audience cannot be brought back to TV watching, even in these extraordinary circumstances. This is TV viewing by month, minutes per viewer, 2021 and 2023. You see red line, 21, light red, 22, and dark red, beginning of 23. It's down, down, down with every year. And one would think that events of 2022 should have brought everyone back to their TV sets. But you see, it is not so. And now to the very last part. We have complained again and again about the difficulties of learning real opinions of the people in a non-free environment where neither the respondent nor the pollster is free to ask and to answer questions. But if we ask, as I said, non-political questions, questions of general type, then we may try to form a kind of impression of what people are thinking. These are the results of Institute of Sociology of the Russian Academy of Sciences. By the way, they conduct very good surveys, whom no one reads. They publish them in boring big books, but they are available also on internet. And I can tell you they're quite interesting. So what we have here is, actually it's a survey of values, technically speaking. 2014, the light brown color, and pink color, 2018. What are the values on which Russia's future should be built? This is the representative poll, the quantitative one, the usual type. So, answer number 1, social justice, 47% to 59% in 4 years. Second answer, rights of people, democracy, freedom of self-expression, liberal values. See the growth, 10 percentage points in 4 years. Russia should be the great empire, the great country. Держава is not a great land, an empire, but it is not just a country either. It's a kind of big country, a country of importance. 32, no change. Next, national tradition, moral and religious values, conservatives. Going down, but still considerable. You will see, of course, that one could give more than one answer, because it doesn't sum up to 100, but it makes more than 100. Next answer, strong, hard power that ensures social order, 26. Closer relations with the West, with the modern developed countries, 11-14, pro-Western party. Free market, private economy, minimum state involvement in economy. And this, by the way, is the Russian libertarianism, a very much underrated line of thought. It's more popular than we think. These are the people who say, I will earn my bread myself, I don't want the state meddling with it. Low taxes, guns for the citizens, a kind of Russian redneck line. And again, if we had free elections, we would see those people. So do not be surprised if we do have free elections suddenly. Next, Russia for Russians, ethnic nationalists, 10-12. None of the above, 9-8. So political scientists call these things proto-party groups. If you do not have free elections, free discussions, political competition, it's hard to determine what views people actually hold. But you can try them with questions like this. So what do we see? These are not, of course, number of votes on a parliamentary elections or a number of mandates in an imaginary parliament of the future. But taken with a big, big grain of salt, we can try to imagine what choice of people may look like. The single most popular party in this imaginary free environment would be the social democratic one, the leftist one, which is very natural in given history and given the rates of poverty in the country. So social justice, fairness, equality, they will be popular. Political greatness, I strongly suspect, will rather lose its popularity in the next couple of years, but still it will be something of a party. Traditionalists, the conservatives, religious conservatives, they would have political representation too. If, again, we had real federation, then in the southern Russia, agrarian regions of Russia like Krasnodar, Stavropol, Rostov-on-Don, Volgograd, etc., they would elect people like this to the federal parliament and for their own governments and for their own regional parliaments. Again, Westerners, liberals, now their position is tantamount to state treason, so it cannot be pronounced publicly. But it has not gone away. They have not all emigrated. So they would most probably have a party too. Russian nationalists, never so popular in Russia as in Western press, but still about 10% with a very fortunate election campaign, and if they have a good leader and a good set of slogans, they may get something. Or they may cooperate with the conservatives. Again, free elections. It is a thing that may surprise somebody. And the libertarians, the low-tax civic guns party, they would also make an appearance. Very last question. What political system is the best for the country? These are results for 2018, but we have the also text for 2021. Red, Soviet system, the one that was here before the 90s. 30% even among the younger, and 62% among our favorite strata, 55 plus. In 2021, 42% of respondents considered democracy to be the most preferable one. Here it's the blue line. So you see in 2018, generally it was 16%. But this is according to Levada. But in 2021, according to the Russian Academy of Sciences, Institute of Sociology, 42%. Maybe they conduct their research with different methods. They do, most probably, but still, you can sense some sort of dynamic. Soviet form in 2021 was acceptable to a quarter of the respondents, and the current existing form, 25%, and 23% rooted for the Soviet system. The current system is represented here with the orange line. So, yeah, that's really the last one. To conclude, I'm not sure that I have managed to paint a very clear picture of my subject, but that was not my intention. It's not a very clear subject to itself. Unfortunately, as I said time and again, Russia does not have a free public sphere. There is no discussion, no real discussion. It is a nation that does not know itself. Because self-explanation and self-description and the invention of the nation is one of the main duties of national intelligentsia. That's what we educated people are there for, to tell ourselves who we are and to tell other people who they are and who they may be. In the absence of all this, we have a public sphere which is filled with myths, false conceptions, snatches of propaganda, memes in the place of ideology, everything but real discussion of real issues. If we do live to see a free environment, Russia will surprise itself and many other experts and watchers as well. Currently, we are very much a muddled society. As I said, we speak in slogans, we speak in memes, we tend to talk about things which do not really matter. We are silent about things which really matter. We do not know what is good for us. We do not know who we are really. I have mentioned that Russia has a reputation of a conservative traditional society, which is not corroborated by any other marker under the sun, by any other behavioral trait which is really visible. It is not conservative. It is not devoted to family values. It is not religious. It is not collectivist. It is highly individualistic, and that's actually bad. We have record low levels of trust, and that's a great barrier to any sort of development. We have really very little to unite us. When sociologists try to grasp what are the symbols, behavioral practices, which are universally recognizable and which can be said to unite the nation, they come up with pitiably few. So what do we have? We have the language. In this respect, we are really uniform. The country is quite large, but we do not have regional variation of language. Not on the scale of England, which is a much smaller country. We have some differences in pronunciation, and we make much of it. Because really, it's the same Russian language spoken from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok and from far north to the far south. There are, again, some words that we use differently, and they immediately made the subject of legend, like this barrier parebrik or bulka baton and all this kind of thing, or who calls molnia patent. So, it's quite a subject among the Russians. But really, language is the same. This is one thing. Second, some snatches and quotations from Soviet movies and songs which are generally recognizable. Something from the course of secondary school education. A Russian-speaking person will generally know who Leo Tolstoy is, even if he or she has not read War and Peace. At least the names are recognizable. And we have two holidays, New Year and the 9th of May. And then, last but not least, we have the president. At least people know what his name is. So that's not much. And tragically, those unifying symbols and practices belong again to the elder generations. For the younger ones, the New Year movie is no longer the irony of fate, but Home Alone. And the 9th of May, you see what's happening to the 9th of May. I'm not sure it will survive the current crisis. Again, I'm not here predicting a collapse of society, disintegration of Russia, or something of this kind. I'm just pointing to certain sociological markers which I think deserve more attention than they get. With this, I will gladly conclude the first part, and should you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you. Should you not have any questions, that's absolutely okay.
Okay, let me just. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, Professor Schulmann, thank you so much for a fascinating lecture and for providing so many insights. I have learned so much. And I originally had planned to enter into a dialogue, into a conversation with you. However, looking at time management, I am afraid, since we only have 10 minutes left, that I will just skip this part and won't dominate any kind of conversation.
Your announcement said we are here till 10.
Yes, but unfortunately we can't, really. We have to leave a bit earlier for administrative reasons. I'm very sorry, but this is...
Okay, time management is
so
maybe
time
not
management
my
is
strongest
my bad.
part.
So are there any questions? Without any further ado, we have a microphone and we have to use it. Please, I think the gentleman here on the left and then the lady on the right. And oh my, so many...
First. Okay. So my name is Alexander. I'm an immigrant from Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, which is very fun.
You have collected quite a bingo.
Yes. I have collected everything. Now I'm from Germany. So I had a question. What do you think is the impact of popularity and collective memory of historical, authoritarian, and totalitarian institutions is for transformation to democratic institutions? So like we have a storied history of, let's say, greatness or success with authoritarian and totalitarian institutions in Russia. So does that have an effect of trying to transition to healthy democratic institutions or not?
Shall we just collect?
I would prefer to answer them one by one,
Okay.
if you
Maybe
allow.
short answer.
Okay. Short answer to a short
Please.
and easy question.
Please.
Again, that's the question that deserves a separate lecture, but putting it in a very, very simplified form. History is an endless collection of facts. You can combine them in any way. I'm sorry to sound cynical here, but I really need to be short. But those memories of totalitarian successes or totalitarian failures, they depend on what is written in your history textbook and what they tell you on TV. If your state tells you that the most proud moments of your country's history are those when it was led by tyrants and despots, and they won great victories, you will believe that. If they tell you that the moment you should be proud of is the period of great reforms under Alexander II, when serfdom was abolished, when we came up with some of the greatest judicial system in Europe, when we had a municipal reform, when we had a penitentiary system reform, and that's the best moment in Russia's history, then in a couple of years you will believe that. So I'm sorry to sound so immensely practical, but a short answer is this.
Thank you very much. Well, I see a hand. It's not to be missed. And please, a short question so that other questions can also be taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Vasilisa. So since many people left Russia within last year because of the war, and the precise number is not known, so it's estimated like 1 million people left Russia. Do you account this number of most reactive, most educated people in this data? Because since they were leaving the country, they couldn't participate in these questions.
You're quite right. We do not know the data. And that's very sad, like we're dealing with a Babylonian empire, we're groping in the dark when trying to study what is happening before our very eyes. But sadly and truly, we do not have numbers. Of course, those people do not participate in polls, but then, as I said, almost no one participates in polls. And I do not like saying that it's the most educated that have left. Those have left that could live and that thought themselves first, in danger, second, able to survive outside of Russia. This decision was made very often impulsively or ruled by individual circumstances. So there was no selection, like you are educated, off you go, you are less educated, you stay like an idiot that you are. That is not true. And with all due respect to people who have left, like myself, Russia is a big country. I do not think that this, even if it was 1 million who left, have materially influenced the composition of society. It is true that people who left were more likely to be urban, educated, middle class, or at least those with transferable skills. But maybe it's just those who had relatives in Europe, so that's why they left. But again, country is big enough to survive our absence. So I think that those dynamics and those proportions that we have seen before the war have more or less held true during 22-23. If we have more immigration and higher death rates, this will influence demography. Demography, unlike public opinion, is very much influenced by what is happening. And we have started this, as I have read, I remember this formula, in a scientific article, this misbegotten war, I like the epithet, that's why I remembered it, this misbegotten war was started, well, there's no good moment to start a war, but this was started at the very worst moment demographically, during the youth gap moment. So we had very few young people, we have killed some and scared away others, and now we are left with a society mainly consisting of old women. So that was not your question, but still.
Thank you. Are there further questions?
So as I understand, the most important part is the demography. And now when I look at this graphics, if you now look, the average is in the range of end 40. So those people have to die away until things change. So we need to wait another 30 years?
Waiting till someone dies is the worst possible political strategy. You may die yourself first, we never know, and you may be so transformed in the process of waiting that this death, when it happens, will be of no use to you. So that's not the tactic I would recommend, nor a strategy either. You know what? We are in Germany at the moment, and if we look at the sociological data in Germany, we see that division between East and West is still very much there. After 30 years, and after all the effort that has been taken, all the money that has been spent, the difference is very much there. So we should not wait for anyone to die. But my point was that this generation born in the 50s has some very specific features which are not seen in any other generation which is bound to succeed them. Because they occupy the positions of power, they are very much able, as we see, to impose their worldview on other people who do not share it. If you want to make a career, you will have to echo the views of your bosses. You will have to repeat what the authorities say. And as we know, we are influenced not just by things we think we believe in, but even by things we think we refuse to believe. But they make us inhabit this environment. We still think within the same framework. That's, by the way, what Soviet ideology did to people. Those guys who are 70 now, when they were 40, and they were 40 in 1991, they thought of themselves as these very rational, very cynical people who do not for a moment believe in the communist idea. Of course not. They were laughing at it, but we know that it shaped their minds. in a way they cannot escape. That's why ruling ideology is so bad. Not because it makes you believe in it, but because it makes you a hypocrite. And then you can no longer differentiate between truth and falsehood. You have no convictions. The question I very often get from Western media is, do those people really believe what they say? And I cannot explain to a Western person a thing that for a Soviet and post-Soviet person needs no explanation. That in a mind of this kind of person, there is no connection whatsoever between what you think, what you say, and what you do. The idea that these three things have to relate to each other somehow is absolutely alien to their minds. You think whatever you think, you say what they want you to hear, and you do what it takes to survive. Again, it's so simple. But how do you explain it to a press correspondent? Does Mr. Patrushev believe that America wants to take Siberia from Russia in order to hide from an explosion of Yellowstone volcano? That was his eldest interview in Izvestia. I read everything he publishes. I'm a fan. I advise you to do the same. He is the secretary of Russian Security Council. He's supposed to be the closest person to the president. So read about this Yellowstone volcano. The safest place will be Siberia, and that's why the states are after it. So put it in your moleskins.
Thank you for this recommendation. I'm sure we'll pick it up. Yeah. So we have time for maybe one more question. There's one in the first row there.
Ekaterina Mikhailovna, thank you for your lecture. My name is Olga, and I'm also one of the immigrants. My question was the increasing amount of repressions which are not even aimed at the, say, higher people in the government, but it's like ordinary people and all this like fake army fake cases, the treason, the new law that passed 3 readings in one day. Like, can we even expect any rise of the protest movement as it was like in the beginning of the war or with the Navalny case? I mean, we definitely will not see one more Bolotnaya, but what's the prospect?
Well, here will be the second installment of political science cynicism. Protests in authoritarian regimes happen not when these regimes exceed a certain level of cruelty. That's the usual impression. When will the people rise? Will they tolerate this? People will tolerate everything. Sorry for this. But that's what political history teaches us. Protests happen when power weakens, not before that. But it's a self-reciprocating process, if you know what I mean. There is a sense that the power is getting weaker, and then suddenly those things that you were tolerating per force yesterday are getting too much for you today. You start to speak up, and by speaking up, you show other people that it's now possible. And more people start doing this, and the power grows weaker and weaker, and the protests get louder and louder, and later on, it will be very hard to differentiate which was the hen and which was the egg. And of course, if there's a regime change, then the next regime will need to legitimize itself by saying that it was the fruit of a mass uprising, not the fruit of the weakening of previous power structures. And then you'll be in this fog of war or fog of revolution again, and not in another 100 years you'll be able to write an objective history. Like this famous answer of a historian about the results of great French Revolution, it's too early to tell. Very true. But usually, almost always, this is what happens. First, the signs of weakness, the signs of defeat, the impression. It's not about realities, it's about perceptions. Legitimacy is a mysterious concept. It's the most mysterious concept in political science. We do not really know what makes people obey and what makes other people command. We have our 3 types of legitimacy thanks to the great Max Weber. We explain it to students, all right, but in the heart of it, there's a bit of a mystery. It's all based on, not all, but it's very much based on impression, on perception, on the way you are perceived. You know, there's this joke that the bank is such an institution that will give you money if you've proved to it that you do not need them. It's the same with power. People will support you if you will make them see that you don't really need their support. And they will protest against you if they will think that you are likely to fall whether they protest or no. How do you manage a process like that? I do not know. Vladimir Lenin knew how to do it. He was very, very savvy in his particular field, which is holding a power by violence. So in this practical respect, I think he's worth reading. He was not a philosopher, so I shouldn't take his opinion for whether an electron or an atom is bigger and smaller, but on how to seize power by violence and how to hold power by violence, he knew his job. So maybe we should brush up our Lenin once in a while.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Schulmann, thank you so much for sharing all these insights, the state of mind, the state of affairs. I think I can speak for all of us when I say this has been a most delightful evening. Thank you so much for coming to our university and for giving this very insightful lecture, which has a very sober outlook, which is, of course, not something that is unexpected.
It was not a delightful subject,
of course,
I'm
not.
afraid.
No, but, of course, highly important. And I am very grateful that you took the time and all the effort to come to us and to outline what is happening, what has happened in the last 5 years, and then, of course, we see in the future. I would already like to extend an invitation, and I hope to see you back maybe in 1 year's time to see what has happened for a further analysis. Ladies and gentlemen,
for this invitation and for this future prospects.
Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Schulmann.